What would you do if the world's most powerful empire hurt your family? For Queen Boudica of the Iceni, the answer was simple. Burn their cities to the ground and slaughter their legions. One peaceful mother transformed into a wrathful warrior, leading one of the bloodiest rebellions in ancient history. This isn't legend or fantasy. It happened, and it nearly drove the Roman Empire out of Britain. Stay tuned, because Boudica's story is darker and more shocking than you can imagine, and its lessons echo to this day. Boudica didn't set out to be a warrior. She was a queen of a small Celtic tribe in ancient Britain, living under uneasy alliance with Roman rule. But everything changed when the Roman occupiers betrayed and brutalized her family. After Boudica's husband, King Prasutagus, died, he had willed that his kingdom be shared between his daughters and the Roman emperor. Rome had other plans. They ignored his will and seized Boudica's lands outright. When Boudica dared to protest this injustice, the Romans responded with unforgivable cruelty. Roman soldiers publicly flogged the queen, whipped her in front of her people, and then, in an atrocity that would ignite any parent's fury, they raped her two young daughters. This was beyond humiliation. It was a horrific violation that left Boudica physically injured, utterly enraged, and determined to seek vengeance. She wasn't alone in her anger. Other Britons had suffered under Roman taxes, land seizures, and oppression for years, but seeing their queen abused was the breaking point. Boudica's personal tragedy became a rallying cry. She vowed to never let the Romans get away with it. And in that moment, a spark caught fire. Boudica's revenge had begun. Why does this matter to us? Because Boudica's story shows the power of standing up to oppression. It's about a regular person, a wife and mother, who, when pushed past her limit, discovered extraordinary courage. It reminds us that standing against injustice, protecting your loved ones and your freedom, is a cause that can inspire anyone to become a hero. Boudica's fury would soon engulf all of Roman Britain in chaos, proving that even the mighty can bleed when people unite against tyranny. Fueled by grief and fury, Boudica picked up a spear and embraced her new role as a warrior. She wasn't a trained general, but she had something even more compelling: righteous anger and the charisma to inspire. Word spread quickly through the tribal lands. The Romans had gone too far, and Queen Boudica was raising the banner of rebellion. One by one, neighboring tribes, including the fierce Trinovantes, answered her call. Thousands of warriors flocked to her side. Imagine the sight. Boudica, towering and flame-haired, standing before a growing army of Britons who were done being victims. She wore a simple tunic with a thick cloak and a golden torque at her neck. A queen now turned avenger. Her eyes blazed with resolve. An artist's imagining of Boudica rallying the Britons. Boudica's voice thundered to her people that freedom was worth fighting for. She reminded them of every insult Rome had dealt: heavy taxes, stolen lands, their loved ones conscripted or killed. "They think we're nothing," she could declare. The crowd roared back in rage. She likely invoked Andraste, the Celtic goddess of victory, calling on divine favor for the battles to come. This wasn't just about her daughters anymore. It was about every Briton's dignity and freedom. Mothers, fathers, farmers, hunters, an entire people grabbed whatever weapons they had: swords, axes, farming scythes, even improvised clubs. An angry horde tens of thousands strong, began to form under Boudica's banner. Boudica's war cry was simple: win or die. She would never bow to Rome again, and she inspired her followers to fight like they had nothing to lose, because under Roman slavery, they didn't. With her 2 daughters riding in the chariot beside her, Boudica set out to avenge wrong with wrath. The stage was set for an unprecedented uprising. The Roman occupiers had no idea what fire was about to rain down upon them. Boudica's first target was Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, the former capital of Roman Britain. This city was a symbol of hated Roman rule. It was a settlement for retired Roman soldiers and home to a massive temple honoring the deceased Emperor Claudius, a temple the Britons despised as a monument to their conqueror. For Boudica, it was the perfect place to unleash her vengeance. The Roman colonists in Camulodunum never saw it coming. When rumors reached them that Boudica's rebel army was marching south, they were dismissive. After all, who would fear a woman leading barbarians? But that scorn turned to terror when thousands of Britons swarmed the city outskirts. The sky blackened with smoke as Boudica's warriors set the town on fire. The Roman veterans and their families panicked. They had no standing legion stationed there, only a small local force and a handful of guards. In desperation, they begged the Roman authorities in Londinium, London, for reinforcements. Rome managed to send a mere 200 soldiers to help, a pitifully small number. It was far too late anyway. Camulodunum was about to learn the true meaning of revenge. Boudica and her horde attacked ferociously, and the city fell almost immediately. The battle was over before it really began. Once Boudica's warriors breached the defenses, they flooded into the streets like an unstoppable plague of death. What followed was not a fight, but a massacre. The Britons showed no mercy. They wanted Roman blood, and they took it. Men, women, and children, everyone of Roman blood, or who sided with Rome, was cut down. People tried to flee, but there was nowhere to escape. Bands of rebels hunted down every last survivor. No corner of the city was spared the horror. The streets ran red with blood as the screams of the dying filled the air. It's said that some desperate townsfolk, including women and children, crowded into the temple of Claudius, barricading themselves inside for refuge. They huddled there for 2 days, praying Roman relief would come. It didn't. Boudica's warriors eventually broke in and slaughtered them all. The entire city was put to the sword, and the slaughter wasn't quick or merciful. Ancient accounts describe ghastly scenes. The Britons, eager to exact pure vengeance, tortured and mutilated their victims. According to one report, the rebels seized the most noble Roman women, stripped them naked, and impaled them on spikes. They cut off the women's breasts and sewed them onto their mouths, a horrifying symbol that left the victims appearing to eat their own flesh. Many captives were hung, burned alive, or crucified as offerings to the Britons' war gods. The rebels even held feasts and celebrations amid the carnage, reveling in their enemies' destruction as a twisted tribute to their goddess of victory. Bodies and body parts littered the ruins of Camulodunum. Think about how terrifying that message was. Boudica was telling Rome, "We will show you no pity, as you showed us no pity." By the time the fires died down, not a single Roman or collaborator was left alive in the city. Boudica had utterly erased Camulodunum in an orgy of blood. So complete was the destruction that they didn't even bother looting much. The Britons preferred to burn everything. a statement that they wanted annihilation, not riches. What had been a proud Roman colony was now charred rubble and ash. The goddess of victory had seemingly answered Boudica's call in the most brutal way. Fresh off the annihilation of Camulodunum, Boudica's rebel army marched next on Londinium, the new thriving trade town that would become London. By now, the Roman governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, finally realized how grave the situation was. Suetonius had been away leading his legions in Wales, but hearing of Boudica's revolt, he raced to Londinium with whatever troops he could gather. His forces were still small, just a few thousand soldiers. When he reached London, he faced a brutal choice: stand and defend the city with too few men and risk total destruction, or abandon Londinium to save his army for a later fight. Seeing Boudica's huge army approaching, Suetonius made the agonizing decision to evacuate himself and the soldiers he had. He left Londinium to its fate, and thousands of residents were left behind, helpless. Boudica did not hesitate. Her army descended on Londinium with the same fury of fire and sword. Suetonius had barely gotten out when Boudica's warriors swarmed the city. They looted the riches of this important town and then set it ablaze. The wooden buildings and warehouses of Londinium burned like tinder. Archaeologists today still find a thick layer of charred red-black ash beneath London's streets. That's the scar of Boudica's wrath, nearly 2,000 years old. As in Camulodunum, anyone who hadn't fled was mercilessly killed. Roman citizens, traders from abroad, even Britons who were friendly to Rome. All were shown the sword, the noose, or the torch. No one was spared. According to the historians, the methods of slaughter were again extremely gruesome. Victims were burned, hanged, and crucified along the main roads. Heads were hacked off, bodies were piled in grotesque displays. Boudica wanted the world to see what happens when you provoke a mother's fury. Having reduced Londinium to smoking ruins littered with corpses, Boudica pressed on to her next target, Verulamium, modern St. Albans. This was another Romanized town north of London, a prosperous settlement of Roman citizens and Britons who had adopted Roman ways. The pattern repeated. Its people had even less warning. Many probably believed the horror stories from other cities were exaggerated, until Boudica's warriors appeared on the horizon. Verulamium was put to the torch, just like the others. Buildings were burned, and civilians were butchered in the streets or while trying to flee. By now, the rebellion had an almost unstoppable momentum of violence. Some accounts say the blood-crazed rebels even sacrificed animals and prisoners as thanks to their gods after each victory. It was total war, not just against Roman soldiers, but against any Roman life or property in Britain. City after city fell in flames. In a few whirlwind weeks, Boudica's uprising had killed an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people, an almost unbelievable death toll for that time. These were mostly Romans and their allies, colonists, soldiers, merchants, and locals who supported the empire. To put it bluntly, Boudica almost wiped Roman Britain off the map. The mighty Roman Empire was reeling from a rebellion led by a woman they had underestimated. The news of the massacres spread terror among Romans across the province. Even Emperor Nero in Rome was reportedly so alarmed that he considered withdrawing from Britain entirely. Imagine that. The Romans pondering whether to abandon Britain, essentially surrendering, all because of Boudica's onslaught. It seemed Rome's rule in Britain was on the verge of collapse. But Boudica wasn't done yet, and neither were the Romans. The final and biggest showdown was coming, and its outcome would seal the fate of Britain. By now, Boudica's forces were massive. Ancient sources claim anywhere from 100,000 to over 200,000 Britons joined her. They were flush with victory, loaded with plunder, and perhaps a bit overconfident after crushing every Roman in their path. On the other side, Governor Suetonius Paulinus had regrouped the remnants of Roman power. He had pulled together about 10,000 legionaries and auxiliaries from the 14th and 20th legions and any other available units. Though hugely outnumbered, easily 20 to 1, these were battle-hardened Roman soldiers, disciplined and equipped with shields, armor, swords, and tactics sharpened by years of warfare. Suetonius knew frontal assault against Boudica's horde would be suicide, so he chose his battlefield carefully. He positioned his army in a narrow defile, a gorge or valley, with thick woods behind them. This meant Boudica's much larger army couldn't outflank the Romans. They would have to charge head-on down a limited front. This shrewd move would negate some of the Britons' numerical advantage. Boudica, for her part, was determined to crush the Romans once and for all. She saw that the governor's troops were few, and likely believed sheer numbers and courage would overwhelm them. Legend says she rode in her war chariot along the lines of her gathered tribes, with her daughters beside her, to inspire the warriors. She would have reminded them of the Roman atrocities, how the Romans whipped her and violated her girls, how the invaders had slaughtered and enslaved their people for years. She urged them to fight bravely for freedom. Some sources claim Boudica told her people that she, a woman, was resolved to win or die. She would not live as a slave, and she thundered that the men could choose to live as cowards if they wanted, but she would not. The Britons, hearing their queen's fiery words, shouted their defiance. They banged their weapons on their shields, ready to charge. This was it, the battle that would decide everything. The Briton warriors, with battle cries and chariots clattering, charged the Roman line. Boudica's army came on in a massive wave, screaming curses and vows of revenge. They expected to once again trample the Romans easily, but Suetonius had arranged his troops in a tight wedge formation. At his signal, the Roman front ranks suddenly launched volleys of heavy javelins, the feared pilum, into the onrushing Britons. Dozens, maybe hundreds of charging Britons were impaled or knocked down in an instant, their momentum stalled by the storm of iron. Then the Romans quickly threw a second volley. The front of Boudica's charge was riddled with casualties. And then, impact, the two forces clashed. This time, the Romans held firm. They had the narrower front, their flanks protected by terrain, so they stood like a wall. Roman shields locked together, swords thrusting out efficiently. The Britons, far less organized, couldn't break that wall. They came in brave but chaotic, funneling into the killing zone. The Romans pushed forward in wedge formation, like an iron plow through flesh. Britons were stabbed and collapsed by the hundreds. Still, more and more tribesmen kept coming, pressing from behind, determined to break the Romans by sheer weight. The battle raged fiercely. The Britons brought their war chariots, trying to terrorize and scatter the Romans, but Roman discipline held. Cavalry on both sides engaged in a frenzy, horses colliding, riders slashing with swords and spears. The noise was thunderous, shouts, clashing metal, the screams of the wounded. For a while, it was a brutal, even fight in pockets, exactly the kind of contest Boudica's people had wanted, their numbers against Roman armor. But gradually, the superior tactics and positioning of the Romans turned the tide. The Britons began to collapse in panic, especially at the front where bodies were heaped and movement became difficult. And then the worst possible scenario for Boudica unfolded. Her warriors started to retreat. First, it was a slow give, then a rout. They turned to run. But behind them, blocking their escape, were their own supply wagons and families. In confident anticipation of victory, the Britons had ringed their battlefield at the rear with wagons, where their women and children sat watching the triumph they expected. Now those wagons became death traps. The fleeing warriors crashed into their own caravan and bottlenecked themselves. The Romans showed no mercy. They surged forward, stabbing and slashing relentlessly. It became wholesale slaughter. Piled up against the wagons, trapped Britons were cut down en masse. Roman soldiers, eager for vengeance after seeing what had been done to their compatriots, did not spare even the women or the animals. It was said that the Roman anger was such that they killed everything in their path to teach the Britons a final, horrific lesson. When the dust settled, the battlefield was carpeted with corpses. Ancient reports claim that over 80,000 Britons died that day, against only a few hundred Romans lost. Even if those numbers are inflated, there is no doubt that it was an apocalyptic defeat for Boudica's army. The mighty rebel host was virtually annihilated in a single blow. This was the end of the rebellion. In one decisive, bloody afternoon, Roman discipline had outmatched Boudica's fury. As for Boudica herself, accounts vary on her fate. What we do know, she did not allow herself to be captured alive. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, when Boudica saw the battle was lost, she poisoned herself, choosing death over the humiliation of falling into Roman hands, where she'd surely face torture and public degradation. Another source, Cassius Dio, claims Boudica fell ill and died shortly after the battle, possibly from shock or a wound, and that the Britons gave her a quiet burial. Either way, Boudica died a free woman, defiant to the end. She never had to suffer the sight of being chained in a Roman triumph parade. For her, the war was over, and just like that, the rebellion was crushed. Roman rule in Britain, which had teetered on the brink, was resecured. Suetonius, though victorious, was ruthless in the aftermath. He went on a punitive rampage, executing any tribes still suspected of disloyalty, until Emperor Nero, fearing further provocation of the natives, replaced him with a more lenient governor. The crisis had been that severe, Rome almost lost Britain. Boudica's war lasted only a short time in AD 60 to 61, but its impact was immense. In the immediate aftermath, the province of Britannia lay in smoking ruins, several major towns destroyed, tens of thousands dead. The Romans eventually rebuilt and continued to rule Britain for centuries, but the memory of Boudica never died. If anything, it grew larger. Roman writers themselves were astonished, and a bit embarrassed, that a woman had dealt them such a terrifying blow. As centuries passed and Roman power waned, Boudica transformed from a rebel into a folk hero. Her legend was kept alive in Britain's cultural memory as a symbol of the indomitable spirit of freedom. Fast forward to the modern era, and Boudica is celebrated as one of Britain's first great heroines. In Victorian times, her story was revived and romanticized. Queen Boudica, the righteous avenger became an icon of national pride and resistance to oppression. Statues and paintings were made in her honor. In London, near the Houses of Parliament, there stands an epic bronze statue of Boudica in her war chariot, daughters at her side, horses rearing as she rides into battle. It's a striking image. The very spot where that statue stands is not far from where she once burned Roman London to ashes. Talk about poetic justice. The statue reminds everyone who passes by of a simple fact. Never underestimate the fury of a wronged woman. Boudica's revenge was one of the most dramatic events in British history. A woman with zero military training nearly kicked an empire out of her homeland. She showed that courage and unity can make even the largest army shake. Her story is dark and tragic, filled with horrific violence and loss, but also deeply inspiring. It's a tale of resisting tyranny, of the love of a mother for her children, driving her to achieve the impossible. It teaches us that standing up for what's right may carry a heavy cost, but it can change the course of history. Boudica didn't win in the end, but her fearless stand became legendary. And maybe that's the ultimate victory. Nearly 2,000 years later, we still speak her name with awe. Queens and generals, rebels and patriots in later ages would draw inspiration from Boudica's uprising. Her life is a reminder that no matter how powerful the oppressor, the human spirit, fueled by justice and love, can roar back. In conclusion, Boudica's tale is as thrilling as it is chilling. A peaceful queen turned avenging fury, cities burned, an empire shaken, a final battle to rival any blockbuster movie, and a legacy that lives on in stone and story. If this epic saga of resilience gave you goosebumps or taught you something new today, then do smash that like button to let us know. Comment below with your thoughts. Did you find Boudica's vengeance justified, or what would you have done in her place? We'd love to hear your take, and don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing history stories coming up. We have plenty of dark, dramatic tales just like this one on the way. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and join our community of history lovers. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. You won't want to miss what's next. Go ahead, tap into your inner Boudica and face your challenges with courage, and we'll catch you in the next story. Until then, stay curious and stay brave.